Well, good morning. If we have not met, my name is Philip. I'm the student minister here at Rise. And about a month ago, my son, Liam Beckett, was born on April 18th. Here's some pictures. He's adorable. We love him. He's a lot less cute at 3 a.m. when he's crying. But while we're thinking about this, while we're thinking about babies, what I want you to imagine is a hospital delivery room. Just picture a delivery room for a second. Imagine the sounds of the hospital. Imagine the beeping of the machines. Picture that I am standing there doing nothing, waiting for my son to be born. Now, I want you to imagine that my wife is laying in the bed. I'm not allowed to hold her hand. As she is in pain going through this ordeal, I can't rest my hand on her head. I can't stroke her hair. I can't hold her hand. I can't comfort her. As my son is born, imagine that the doctors refuse to hand him to me. I'm not allowed to touch him. In fact, I'm not even allowed to be in the same room. I'm not allowed to be in the hospital. I'm not allowed to be in the city. I'm not even allowed to be around other people. Imagine the day maybe that your own children were born. Imagine what it might feel like not being allowed to hold your child. You can't comfort them when they cry. You can't change their diaper or feed them. Imagine that maybe you aren't even allowed to see them or be around them. Imagine not being able to hug your parents, not being allowed to eat dinner with them or sit with them, not being allowed to talk to them. You're an outcast, sent away from society. No one will look at you. No one will touch you. People avoid you. And when they see you, they yell in fear. As we begin the next part of our series through Matthew, we are entering into a short series that we're calling The Kingdom Advances. And as we start this morning, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 8, beginning in verse 1. And what I've asked you to imagine was a reality for a large number of people during the time of Jesus. People who were afflicted with leprosy were cast out from society and were forced to live outside the community and were by law required to announce their presence when they were around people. Think about the way that you felt when you were imagining all the things you couldn't do. The lack of contact with a person can have significant impacts, both physically and mentally. Something that was reiterated to us when my son was born is that the importance of skin-to-skin contact. Babies who are not touched can face significant struggles, including death. And that need for contact, that need for connection with another person doesn't go away when we grow up. We have been designed to live in community, to be with other people. Those feelings that I've asked you to imagine were the reality for so many in the days of Jesus. And as we begin to dig into these scriptures, I want you to remember that feeling. I want you to remember how you felt thinking through that. So we're going to start in Matthew chapter 8, beginning in verse 1. It says this: When Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." This story is a significant one in the journey of Jesus, in fact, being repeated in both Mark chapter 1 and Luke chapter 5. And this person, this man, he was afflicted with one of any number of skin conditions that were commonly classified as leprosy. Leviticus chapter 13 speaks on a number of regulations regarding leprosy and defiling skin conditions. Key word here being defiling, because these skin conditions would cause a person to not only be sick, but to be ceremonially unclean. And this ceremonial uncleanliness meant exclusion from the community's religious life, which included participation in temple worship and sacrifices. This unclean person was often required to undergo specific purification rituals to be restored to a state of cleanliness if and when their disease would go away. Leviticus chapter 13, verses 45 and 46 say this: "Anyone with such a defiling disease must wear torn clothes. Let their hair be unkempt. Cover the lower part of their face and cry out, 'Unclean, unclean!' As long as they have the disease, they remain unclean. They must live alone. They must live outside the camp." And Leviticus 5, verses 2 and 3 says this: "If anyone becomes aware that they are guilty, if they unwittingly touch anything ceremonially unclean, whether the carcass of an unclean animal, wild or domestic, or of any unclean creature that moves along the ground, and they are unaware that they have become unclean, but then they come to realize they are guilt, or if they touch human uncleanness, anything that would make them unclean, even though they are aware of it, but then they learn of it and realize their guilt." And it continues from here to outline the consequences and restitution for this uncleanliness. It would outline how to be made clean again. These verses give us context for what is about to happen with Jesus. When this man with leprosy comes forth, if anyone were to touch him, they would be made unclean. These laws were not meant to be cruel. They were intended to preserve and protect the larger community from this disease. But try telling that to someone who's been cast aside because of a disease that they can't control. So coming back to this moment with Jesus, Matthew chapter 8, verse 3, tells us how Jesus reacts. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. Max Lucado, in his book, Just Like Jesus, reimagines the story of this man in an incredible way. And I just want to read a little bit from it. "For 5 years, no one touched me. No one, not one person. Not my wife, not my child, not my friends. No one touched me. They saw me, they spoke to me. I sensed love in their voices. I saw concern in their eyes, but I didn't feel their touch. There was no touch, not once. No one touched me. What is common to you I coveted: handshakes, warm embraces, a tap on the shoulder to get my attention, a kiss on the lips to steal my heart. Such moments were taken from my world. No one touched me. No one bumped into me. What I would have given to be bumped into, to be caught in a crowd, for my shoulder to brush against another's. But for 5 years, it has not happened. How could it? I was not allowed in the streets. Even the rabbis kept their distance from me. I was not permitted in my synagogue, not even welcome in my own house. I was untouchable. I was a leper, and no one touched me until today." This reimagining continues throughout the chapter and beautifully expands the imagination of this story. But the only reality that we can be sure of for this man was that he had not and could not be touched for the duration of his disease. But Jesus did. Jesus healed the disease with his words. The rest of verse 3 tells us that. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." Immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. With his words, Jesus healed the man's disease. With his touch, Jesus healed the man's heart. Imagine, if you will, that as this man stepped towards Jesus, the crowd stepped back. Maybe they pointed. Maybe they yelled the words that he had heard all too often: "Unclean!" This man stepped forward, and instead of stepping back, Jesus reached out. Jesus touched the man. The purpose of these laws were to quarantine a person with disease. People weren't supposed to touch lepers because the disease could spread. And touching them would make them ceremonially unclean. But when Jesus touched the leper, instead of becoming unclean himself, the leper was instead made clean by the touch of the holy God. Verse 4 continues this story. "Then Jesus said to him, 'See that you don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them.'" Luke and Mark tell us that the news began to spread about Jesus. And Mark goes on to say that this man actually went and told people instead of going to the temple. Imagine what might have happened right after he was healed. We don't know if he was married or if he had children, but if I were in his shoes, that would be the first place I would go. Maybe I would go see my parents. Maybe I'd go see my friends. As the news of Jesus' signs and miracles continued to spread and the kingdom advanced and expanded, there were many who would come into contact with him. And we see as we continue in chapter 8 that the next person to come to him was a Roman centurion. Matthew 8, verses 5 and 6. When Jesus entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, asking for help. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly. Luke chapter 7 gives us an expanded version of this story containing more details that outline that this centurion was well respected by the Jewish people, that he loved the nation, he helped build their synagogue. These Jewish elders that came pleaded with Jesus on behalf of the centurion. I want to encourage you to read it on your own later, but the important thing to take is that this man, a Gentile, a non-Jewish person, was seeking out Jesus for a miracle. Verse 7 says this, Jesus said to him, shall I come and heal him? I think this is such an interesting question. At face value, it's just a simple question. Should Jesus come and heal the servant? But it's interesting to think about what's going on under the question. What is Jesus really asking here? For example, in Matthew 15, we see a similar incident with a Gentile woman who comes and asks for healing from Jesus. And Jesus doesn't immediately do it. He instead asks her questions that seem intended to draw out her faith, testing her. Jesus also tells her that he was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. Now, I don't want to dig too deeply into this because this is something we'll cover in a later sermon, but what I'm trying to highlight here is that Jesus' intent with Gentiles who sought him out for healings is that his ministry focus, first and foremost, was to the Jews. Paul is later described as the apostle to the Gentiles. That was his ministry focus. So the interesting thought, the question beneath the question, is Jesus suggesting that it is not within his purview, that he should not concern himself with this healing, or rather, is Jesus trying to draw out the faith of the centurion? Verses 8 and 9 tell us what happens. The centurion replied, Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say, do this, and he does it. The centurion's faith is put on full display when he recognizes here that the power and authority of Jesus is such that he doesn't even need to be present in order to perform this miracle. Luke 7 even indicates that the centurion didn't even feel worthy to have this conversation with Jesus in person, and instead did so through the Jewish elders that initially vouched for him. What an incredible statement of his faith that he knew that Jesus would be able to heal this servant without seeing him, without touching him, without speaking to him. Verse 10 says this, when Jesus heard this, he was amazed and said to those following him, truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. Jesus was amazed at his show of faith. Maybe this indicates that this was a test. We can't really know for sure what he might have been asking underneath this face value question, but it is clear that Jesus is going to respond to this faith. Even more incredible, I believe, that this centurion, a living symbol of Jewish oppression, was being lauded as having greater faith than any in Israel. Verse 11 says this, I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus' declaration here in verse 11 is incredible. The fact that such faith was present in a Gentile caused Jesus to announce that there would not only be Jews in heaven, but that there would be Gentiles in heaven. This is unthinkable to a Jewish audience. He uses a figure of speech here known as a merism. It's a metaphor that uses parts or extremes to express the whole. So when he's saying the east to the west, he's not just saying people who live east and west. He's saying all people. There will be people from all over the world, which includes Gentiles. And Paul expresses this in Romans 1, that the gospel came first for the Jews and then the Gentiles. The kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, is not confined only to the Jews. It is only for the Jews first. I've used this word Gentile a lot. I just want to clarify that a Gentile is any person who is not a Jew. One of the themes of Matthew's gospel is that the kingdom of heaven is for all people. As the kingdom advances beyond the early ministry of Jesus, we see that it advances beyond just the Jews, but also to the Gentiles. And thank God for that, because most, if not all of us, are Gentiles. Verse 12 then says this, "But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." So the first main point from this verse is this: even as the Gentiles' racial identity was not an automatic barrier to the kingdom, neither was the Jewish racial identity a guarantee into the kingdom as they once thought. Even though the Jews were subject of this kingdom, they could be cast out of it. Secondarily, Jesus says that for those who have been cast outside into this darkness, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, weeping is the obvious one. They're crying a lot. There will be those who've been cast out, and they will be mournful. They will be sad, weeping greatly at their despair that they have been sent away into this outer darkness, into hell. But there will be others who are gnashing their teeth. This is a Greek phrase that literally means grinding one's teeth together. So it could be a symbol of pain, but R.C. Sproul describes them as being in hell and instead saying toward God, "How dare you?" With a full anger at their position and at God, saying, "How dare you put me here?" With the juxtaposition of what Jesus just said about the Gentiles, I often wonder if he may be expressing that the Jews who are cast out of the kingdom will look back, see Gentiles in heaven, and be filled with indignation and rage. Continuing in verse 13 with this interaction with the centurion, then Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, let it be done just as you believed it would." And his servant was healed at that moment. The resolution to Jesus' encounter with the centurion is striking. He says, "Go, let it be done just as you believed it would." And at that moment, the servant was healed. Jesus didn't travel to the house. He didn't touch the servant. He didn't have to see him. The servant didn't have to hear Jesus doing anything. Jesus proved that the centurion had not overestimated him. He understood Jesus' authority maybe better than anyone else to this point, except for maybe Mary and John the Baptist. The authority of Jesus is so complete, so immediate, that distance itself is irrelevant to him. And that completely recontextualizes the encounter with the leper, whom Jesus did touch. Evidently, he didn't have to. He did not have to physically touch the man to heal him from leprosy, but he did. Jesus is not only powerful when he's standing next to the person. He's not only powerful when he can see them or touch them. He's not only powerful when you're sitting in a church. The centurion's faith was not misplaced sentiment. It was real faith in the real authority of Christ. And Jesus honored that faith. Now, I want us to be careful here. Jesus is not saying that faith is a force by which we make God do what we want. He is not praising the centurion for merely having confidence. The strength of this did not come from the faith of the centurion, but from the object of his faith, from the authority of Christ. Verses 14 and 15 continue in this trend of Jesus healing people. It says this: when Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand and the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on him. As Matthew continues, he moves us from the public encounter with a Gentile centurion to a public official to the home of one of Jesus' own disciples. And I think that matters because the ministry of Jesus is not only for dramatic moments in public. It's not only for the crowds. It's not only for the outcast in the streets or the powerful man in uniform. Jesus walks right into the ordinary places of life, into a home, into a family, into a room where someone is sick in bed. And what he finds is not leprosy, not paralysis, but a simple fever. It may not be as dramatic, but if you've had to watch a loved one suffer, you know that pain inside the home carries its own kind of weight. Trouble in the home has a way of touching everything. Maybe Peter was feeling troubled in their journeys, but didn't want to ask. Maybe he did ask. But what happens is he steps into this home and we see him touch a person in need. We shouldn't brush past that detail. Jesus touched the leper. Now he touches Peter's mother-in-law. Jesus is not distant from human suffering. He is not indifferent to her circumstances. He isn't too important to step into a home and care about one sick woman in one ordinary house in private. And notice the result. The fever left her, and she got up and began to serve him. And I think this might be part of why Jesus physically went there. We know from what we've just read that he could have healed her at any time, in any place, whenever he felt like it. But what this gives us is a beautiful picture of restoration. Jesus doesn't simply remove the sickness. He restored her. And with her newfound strength, she served Jesus. The response of a person touched by Jesus is to serve. Not because she was earning anything, not to pay him back, but because when Christ has truly restored you, your heart is moved toward him. That is the pattern of discipleship. Jesus touches our hearts. Jesus restores us. And then we serve him in response. Once we are rescued, we are immediately a part of the rescue team. Verse 16 continues then to tell us what more happens. When evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with a word and healed all the sick. So by evening, the crowd has grown. Word is spreading. The kingdom is advancing. People are bringing the oppressed, the afflicted, the broken, the hurting. And Matthew tells us that Jesus drove out the spirits with a word, and he healed all the sick. The same Jesus who touched the leper can heal with a word. The same Jesus who responded to the centurion from a distance can now stand before a crowd and demonstrate that no form of human brokenness is beyond his authority. Disease bows to him. Demons bow to him. Uncleanness bows to him. The kingdom is advancing because the king has come, and wherever the king goes, the effects of the fall begin to give way. And Matthew is showing us that these miracles are not disconnected stories. Matthew is painting a picture of what it looks like when the kingdom of heaven advances into a broken world. Verse 17, he draws this attention. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and bore our diseases. So here Matthew pauses to tell us exactly how we are meant to understand everything that we have just read. These are not just impressive moments. These are not just acts of compassion, though they are both of those things. These are healings that are the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy. Matthew reaches back to Isaiah 53 and says that Jesus is the servant of the Lord whom Isaiah spoke of. And Isaiah 53 is one that points towards the crucifixion. Jesus stepped into the misery of a fallen world to carry our burdens. This is what we've been seeing throughout the chapter. He is bearing the burdens of these people. He is healing them of this. If you are willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus reached out to touch someone when everyone else would avoid him. Just say the word, and Jesus heals someone he never physically sees. Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law and so many others. And Matthew wants us to see that this is not separate from the cross. This is pointing to it. The healing and restoration that Jesus performs here is temporal, but it is a preview of the greatest eternal healing and restoration that we can experience through him. If I can give you any homework this week, it would be to go home and read Isaiah 53 to see this picture. Everything in this section of Matthew that we have looked at whispers of something greater. Every story of restoration points to a greater redemption. Matthew chapter 8, verse 18 says this: when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. This is an important turn because after all of these miracles, after all the momentum that has been building, Jesus kind of puts a stop to it. The crowds are here. They are growing. People are coming. And he decides to leave? Why? If Jesus was merely just making a movement, we would just continue to grow this crowd. But he leaves. Because Jesus never mistook crowds for disciples. Jesus knew that popularity did not equal faith. People were amazed by Jesus. They were drawn to him, but they also wanted things from him. And Jesus always seemed to know the difference between being impressed by him and truly following him. Verses 19 and 20, he continues to kind of pare down the crowd. Says this: then a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." So one thing to note, Jesus here calls himself the Son of Man. This is a prophetic title for the Messiah that Jesus enjoyed using for himself. And this statement that comes here, at first glance, this is a wonderful sentiment. I will follow you anywhere. And maybe the scribe is sincere here. Maybe he is being honest about this. Maybe he would follow him anywhere. But maybe he's also just really excited about everything that is happening. But Jesus answers the heart, not the words. He tells the man that following him means discomfort. It means uncertainty and giving up the assumption of earthly ease and security. In other words, if you are going to follow Jesus, understand what you are signing up for. Don't follow him because the crowd is large. Don't follow him because the miracles are impressive. Don't follow him because it seems exciting in the moment. I think it's important for us as we live as disciples and as we make disciples that we not only celebrate the enthusiasm of new believers, because we should do that, but that we also make sure that they understand the cost. This is one of a handful of times where Jesus raises the bar for those who would follow him and reduces the crowd, or potentially reduces the crowd. Because he wants to make sure that no one wanders into discipleship under false pretenses. We should have that same care. Verses 21 and 22 are another example here. Another disciple said to him, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead." This sounds a lot more reasonable to us, doesn't it? More understandable, maybe even defensible. It doesn't sound like rejection. It sounds like delay. I want to follow you, but I have something to do first. I need to have a funeral first. There's been a lot of discussion over exactly what this man meant. Some believe his father had not yet died, and he was asking to postpone discipleship until a later season of life, after family duties and inheritance matters had been settled. And if this is the case, then what sounds like a small delay is actually an indefinite postponement. And how often do we do the same thing? I'll follow Jesus after this. After this season of life, when things calm down, when life is less complicated, once I've lived a little, once baseball season is over, once my kids are out of the house. The call of Christ does not come after every other priority has been comfortably arranged. It comes first. He's not saying that family has no value. He's saying that no earthly claim can sit above his call. When Christ says, "Follow me," every other allegiance must fall underneath that command. And that is the dividing line of this whole chapter, this whole section. The leper came with desperate faith. The centurion came with humble faith. Jesus restored Peter's mother-in-law, and she began to serve. The crowds came amazed at his power. But now Jesus presses the issue. Will you follow him when it costs something? And that may be the greatest question hanging over all of Matthew chapter 8. We see what Jesus can do for us, and then he asks, will you stick with me when it costs you something? Do we want Jesus enough to follow him? Or do we want him not only as Savior, but as King and as Lord? Jesus offers healing to everyone, to the untouchable, to the outsider, and to the family of his disciples. Again and again, Matthew shows us that no one is beyond the reach of Christ. But the same Jesus who heals says, "Follow me." So if you know today that you need the healing, the restoration that only Jesus can give, then don't put it off. Count the cost. Know that Jesus is Savior and Lord. Come to him and make that decision today.